Welcome to the Student Sector Spotlight podcast, brought to you by the Humber Outreach Programme.
It's been a couple of months since we've had an episode of the Student Sector Spotlight podcast, and today I am being interviewed. I'm being interviewed by Hannah, who is HOP's wonderful administrator. So thanks, Hannah, for doing this today.
You're very welcome. It's nice to put you in the spotlight for a change.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I will pass it over to Hannah.
Thank you very much. I think it's really interesting. It's really lovely that you're on here and want to, do a podcast about you as well. I think it's really interesting to get to know the people behind the podcast. So how did you get into marketing? What was your pathway? When did it start for you?
So I started off in theatre, so performing and theatre making, so not just the performance side, but theatre making. And I guess with that came a lot of event planning and marketing as a result of that, because often when you're starting out in the industry, if you want to be a theatre maker, not just a performer, you're working with very small budgets, and it means everyone's kind of got to get stuck in and do a bit of marketing. So you don't necessarily have that at that point a role in your team where it's like, this is the marketing person or this is the events person. So it came from that, really, and I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the marketing side, the events side, speaking to different people, trying to figure out how to reach an audience and that kind of thing. And also it was at a time where there was a lot of funding cuts for the arts, so it was difficult to continue with that career pathway, particularly as a theatre maker and not just an actor. And then I worked for a couple of different organisations in education, doing events, marketing, that kind of thing. So I had a degree actually in theatre and drama, and then went back and did a master's in marketing and advertising. I absolutely loved that year for so many reasons. Doing a master's was, I would never have called myself particularly academic before then, and I was like an average performer, academically. I got like a 2-1, which is still a really good mark in my undergrad, but going back into education, I think it will have been like 6-7 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I think it is in year 20. So I went back at 27. I did so much better. Like I performed so much better. I just got better marks, and that was the best thing. And then it solidified me wanting to do that as a career. And then got a job doing marketing for Whole New Theatre, which made sense because of my background, which was good. And I did lots of stuff again within education in there, and different press nights and different kind of shows. And then worked for an agency doing marketing for them, but they specified in socially good marketing. So working with different health organisations or education companies, mental health charities, that kind of thing. It's really nice to be able to market something that's helping the world, I guess. And then got the job here. So, I mean, I've had other employment throughout my career, part-time work and things that I've done in between all of that. But that's the progression of how I've ended up here.
I think doing the experience with the theatre making and having all that background as well, do you think that helped you have a drive for the variety of the different things you've done in the marketing sector?
It's interesting with marketing, because I've done agency work where you get a new organisation every couple of months and you have to come up with new campaign concepts or branding, and it's like totally, I'll be working with I think I'm doing like a lung health campaign one day and then a specific education thing another day, and you have to change your brain. I loved that. But there's something I think that's harder about working for one company, where you have to keep trying to be fresh and thinking of new things. In some ways, for me, that's more of a challenge. Is to be like, oh, what can I do now, or what can I tap into, and that kind of thing. And I think, you're probably right. I think the speed of theatre is so fast paced, and you have to keep up with trends, and you have to, have that kind of brain or mentality where you're happy to run around and be doing a million different things. It probably has had an impact on the way I work now, or why I've picked this, for sure.
What skills do you think you've learned over the years in doing that, in having to be adaptable and thinking things from a new perspective and being fresh and being willing to sort of run around and kind of dip your toes into everything?
One thing I think is networking and keeping relationships with people. The podcast is an example of that. because it's I guess a testament to my relationships with people within the Humber region in businesses and within theatre and just with that. So I think that always helps, because you can always, if there's something that you don't know or what you want to tap into, there's someone that you know that will be able to help you or give you a start. It's really important in marketing, I think, to try and have strong connections with people. Keeping, and I could be better at this. This is something that I know that I could be better at, but there's only so many hours in the day, is keeping up with things and not falling at the wayside. You know, a lot of people, for example, some marketing people might not use Facebook, but it's like, well, if you stop using that and something happens and you need to be on there, then you don't quite know what you're doing. So I think keeping up with things and making that part of your day-to-day and social life, I guess, which I know I can be better at. There's platforms that I don't know well enough yet that I need to sort of pick up on, but I'm aware of it, and that's a good thing. So keeping up with trends and platforms, I think, is a big one.
A-levels, would you say, would you guide or inform students to get into marketing, or even just the education marketing sector? What advice would you give in that sense?
In terms of having a marketing career, that can come as a result of so many things. So I always think you need to pick the subject that you absolutely love, because if you hate something, like, you won't succeed. So from my perspective, obviously I went down a theatre background, but that's led me into marketing. So first and foremost, I would always say pick the subjects that you really love doing. But if you absolutely love marketing from day one and you want to do that, I think obvious ones are English, probably both language and literature, and business is always good. I think it's good to have an all-round knowledge of how business works and how marketing fits into, like, the umbrella of business, and looking at finance, because finance can be a big part of business. Looking at how much budget you have and what you've got to play with. So I think those three are really good. Media as well is always excellent, because I think what's happening now, because you've got so many platforms with video content like your TikToks or Reels and that kind of thing, is having a bit of a media background is helpful, I think, to be able to create that content. And sometimes there are so many roles within marketing. You can be a data marketing person, that's your one job within an organization, or you can be somebody like me that has to try and be a jack of all trades. And actually, when you do a solid marketing degree, you don't learn video editing, you don't learn graphic design. It's that's a completely different degree if you were going to university. If you've got a bit of a media background, I think it's helpful, because if you end up in a role like me, there's an expectation of knowing a little bit of all of those things to be able to do as best as you can in the one, if you're that one person like me. And my previous job, there was a full graphic design team. I never had to do that, because they wouldn't have expected me to do that, because that wasn't my job. Whereas when you work solely for an organization like I do, you have to learn a little bit of how to do that. I think it just gives you a bit of an upper hand, I guess.
Do you think the sector in general, I know it's a bit of a generalisation, but do you think it is quite a supportive sector in terms of if you're wanting to gain those extra skills that you maybe don't have that you might need? Are there places that you can reach out to and things like that to get like additional training or free support or free resources, or there's little bits of a leg up that could help?
I think some of the smaller agencies are always open to having work experience and people in, more so than a bigger organisation like us. I think that they work quite well with that, and they often like having new people come in, and they're the people that, if there are apprenticeships going, you're more likely to see it in some of your agencies. So there were really good experiences for students to get. But I think a lot of it is online. You can create a lot of free accounts with editing, and there's so many YouTube channels now where you can just learn all of that. I think you can be proactive in doing that. And I think I've written this in my notes for today later on to talk about, but when you start to get a social media platform, is really, if you are someone that's going to go into marketing, and actually for anybody, is really think about what you're putting on there in terms of it being an actual portfolio of work, because an employer will look on there, particularly if you're marketing. So I think it's not just like, oh, be careful of your digital footprint, but actually use that to your advantage and start to work on what your own brand is as an individual and how you want to be employed, because it's practice, and it will be really helpful when you get to that point of applying for jobs. And if you carry on doing that into university and, you know, keep that platform up and running.
I imagine as well there is that balance where you can, like you said, you know, have your own social media accounts and things like that, and, you know, tweak them, tailor them, you know, use it as a way of practicing those skills, and you know, reaching out for the YouTube videos and tutorials and things like that, just to kind of get some experience into your belt of just having a go with stuff and becoming familiar. Even with terminology, I imagine there's a whole plethora of terminology out there that you need to learn as well. So
yeah, and that changes every 5 minutes because it's digital. It's like, oh, you think you figured something out, and then literally a month later it'll be totally different. And like,
would you recommend either a university route or further education route for the sector?
You can do an apprenticeship, and there are places that definitely offer them. So I think that, you know, that's a definite route and pathway, particularly if you're someone that doesn't want to maybe leave home, or you've got the certain commitments. I think that you can definitely do an apprenticeship. Obviously there's benefits to that with being paid. Obviously I've been to uni and that's been my pathway. There's so much value in university for somebody in marketing than just the actual course. So the course is brilliant, but, you know, networking and getting to meet new people and societies that you can join, and, you know, you might join a society and then be like, oh, I'll do all the marketing for that society. Like, there's so much to dip into that can be part of your life, and you can be doing part-time work alongside of that as well. So I think the extra stuff at the side of university and the connections you can make, the connections with the lecturers. And I did my master's. Some of the campaigns that we did were actual campaigns for proper organisations. I did one for Young's. We did one for their, like, I can't remember what the actual product was. I think it might have been a new fish finger product or something like that. And we actually pitched it to the organisation where we were marked at the same time. And then the top 3 were taken to, like, the headquarters. So we went to the headquarters and we pitched it to them. There was a couple of organisation, Oxfam, that we pitched to. So you also get to still speak to industry professionals along the way, and get that real experience of marketing. And, you know, I was offered a job as a result of a company called Humber, who they did like a seed product that we had to market, and they offered me a job as a result of that. And so there's a lot there's a lot of stuff like that where I think people think you go to uni, you get your degree, and that's kind of it. But for me, there was so much more, and I'm still part of different Facebook groups with jobs that are constantly advertising there in the area of these people that I'd kind of worked with at university. I'm still connected to all of the lecturers within the business department, and they have networking events at whole uni what you can go to. So for me, there's a lot of benefits to it, and I think you can go and you can learn how to do that job with an apprenticeship, but you might not get those contacts or social experiences and cultural experiences of the people that you might meet along the way. So I think I would say university, but there's definitely pros to apprenticeships as well.
You mentioned a bit about being like quite an organic experience in terms of, you know, meeting people and socialising and going to different events and networking, where you maybe weren't even realising you were networking, you were practicing those skills sort of early on. Do you think having just any opportunity, whether it is at university or in further education, do you think it's nice to kind of throw yourself into those opportunities, even if it's not your comfort zone?
Absolutely. I think it's really important, and it's frightening, but I think it's a big part of marketing. There's so many veins to it, and, you know, some people might want to just sit in their lane and be, I'm going to be a data person, or I'm going to be a campaign person or an event person, but you can only improve and get better by taking those chances and those risks. And I think, like, connecting with people is so important in this industry. It's everything in terms of how you grow as an individual, or how your organisation might grow. You'll see there are so many marketing networking events in Hull because they're such an important part of it. And I think you do have to, you have to take yourself out your comfort zone, because it's so quick paced that if you don't keep doing that, you'll fall behind. And that's a really frightening part of marketing, but it's also an exciting part of marketing.
The things that you thought, I'm not gonna like that, and actually you're like, oh, I love that.
Yeah, editing. Because I was in front of the camera for so long, and with acting and performing, and loved that side of things, the whole videography stuff for me when I started to do it. So I did that when I worked in an agency. That's how I started doing videography. I was really lucky that I got the opportunity to do that. So a lot of my stuff I did was producing work. So I'd come up with I'd look at the script and work out the actual planning of the day, like, oh, the sun sets at this time, so we need to be done by this, and then we're in this room, and then, set and all that. And then from there I ended up performing in one and then editing one, because we were low on time and they were like, Rach, you're just gonna have to get stuck in. So I did it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna hate this, because it's so fine detail. The people that love that kind of thing will love it. And I loved it, and I realized how much creativity is in video editing. I think it seems so clinical and dull, but actually you can change so much with just like the tiniest thing. So definitely videography in general and video editing, I think, are things that I love.
Can you remember, I know it's a little while ago, can you remember what the application process was like, or anything that you had to do at interviews for jobs or things like that you think would be useful to share with others?
Depends on the role you go for, actually. A lot of the time it is your general application form or CV cover letter. In the context of working with Hop, it was a form online, and you sort of almost were transferring your cover letter and CV onto a form online, which you'll find often. But with marketing, particularly if you're going for agency or a creative role, you'll often be asked to do a video, like a 5-minute video about who you are and your background, because they'll want to get a sense of your personality, because that's just the way it is. So yeah, video often is the way forward with marketing. To get used to videoing yourself is something that I would definitely say. And I always think with marketing, having a creative CV and a more kind of serious, because again, people reading CV and cover letters, particularly two of each of those, I think is really good to have, because if you apply for agency, you've got to grab someone's attention quite quickly. I think one of my first ones that I applied, I think I opened it with something like, I'm Rachel, I'm a Hull lass, because it was a Hull organisation, and then in brackets like, does a high kick, like, rather than just like your standard kind of CV. It's like things like that will grab their attention really quickly. But you don't want to send that if you're going to like a data company, because like, who is this person? So having two of those I think is good. Also links all the way through to your LinkedIn and any other social media that's professional, put that throughout. If you're a blogger, which is great to do, again, if you was someone at uni or even younger, you want to start blogging early, that's excellent. Put some examples of work in. You might be asked to have a portfolio of work as well with marketing. That's often common. So some people put that into video format, some people put it into a PDF kind of document format, depends on the sort of work that you've done. My friend is a marketing person, but also has a qualification in graphic design. So he specialises in graphic design and marketing, where I'm not. I'm more like videography, marketing. So your portfolio will be different for each person, but portfolios are often common as well. And then usually there can be multiple stages. It can just be interview and then offered the job. There might be more than one interview. You might be interviewed by an initial person and like a CEO, and a test is quite common. I've done a few of those. So they'll ask you to write a blog in half an hour on a certain thing, and you'll have to save it in a certain area. That can be quite common, or coming up with various things. So some places will get you to do some kind of test as well. It's quite varied in marketing. You can go from a normal CV and then a job interview to having to do a video, come and do a test, be interviewed 3 times. It just totally depends on the company. But yeah, I think there's ways of preparing for all those eventualities, which is what I would recommend.
I think keeping those portfolios and those different types of CVs kind of regularly up to date is a good idea, so that if you can sort of just pull areas from each CV or from this sort of portfolio, but you're not having to constantly go back and think, oh, when did I do that, and what date was that, what year was that? Definitely
keep everything that you do up to date, and even more so on LinkedIn. And try and, for anybody actually, I think most people I know that are active on LinkedIn, not marketing but in general, a lot of their job opportunities come from there. It's not from applying on Indeed. If you're really active on LinkedIn and you make the most of it as a social media, you'll reap the benefits. I've been offered jobs on LinkedIn like a lot of times, because I'm up to date, and you can attach YouTube videos, things that you might be doing, and campaigns that you've done. That is for marketing people. a lot of the time that's almost their CV, is having that. So I mean, speaking of which, mine's not up to date, so it does need doing. But you can put so much on there. It's such a good platform. Like I say, all my video content is on there that you can scroll through and read, and both of those CVs and social medias. If you're a big Instagram user and you have like a professional account, again, keeping that up to date is as important, I would say.
It sounds like they are great platforms to enable you to get yourself across.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just keeping everything fresh, and your personality as well coming across, I think, so important, because they will look for that, because ultimately often marketing is getting somebody's brand or image across. That's what we're doing. So if you're doing that and you're so clear, someone looks at your whatever, your Instagram or your TikTok, and they just know who you are from that, then it's a big win, because it's like, well, that person knows what they're doing.
On the topic of doing things that inspire you, the podcast, it's great. I think it's fantastic, and it's so refreshing to kind of hear firsthand, local employers and other people that you know through your networking, and having the opportunity to pick their brains, to ask them the honest question, the things that everybody wants to know. What kind of inspired you to do the podcast?
On a personal note, we've discussed earlier on in this podcast that keeping fresh and doing things is important. I want to continue to grow, and it's a new skill, and of course obviously I already videoed it. I have some kind of knowledge of editing something down. Podcasting editing is very different really, but it was something that I wanted to personally do to improve that skill set and grow and learn. We needed to podcast because I think it's just an obvious thing to do, and it's like double content in that we record these like this, so it's also a YouTube content as well as an actual podcast. It's a 2-in-1, so that's good, because it's it's really time consuming. I think for us, I was like, well, we're really good with the LEPs in the area, in the CEC, and just generally local enterprise, and I thought, well, this is where we sort of sit and where our niche is. Let's see where this goes. I always knew it was a niche podcast because obviously it's sectors, so a student is going to specifically listen to the sectors that they're interested on. It's not going to be like a student podcast where they go, we're going to go through student finance, then we're going to go through UCAS, and we're going to go through, and a lot of them exist and they're brilliant. But for us, this felt more natural, and it was a gap that already existed in the area. There are a lot of those podcasts that we push and promote those podcasts on our website and social media. So yeah, I think it was personal reasons and knowing where our strengths lie and how to tap into that.
What do you think's worked well so far?
Initially, I was like, right, I would love to have one a month. Let's do it, and I want to try and get to. So I was like, this is like February last year. I was like, right, let's try and get to Christmas, and that'll be like season 1. Yeah. But that means 10 employees. So that for me was like, wow, okay, yeah, this is, or 10 different sectors as well. But actually, we did it, and that worked well, and I think it's strengthened our connections even further. It's promoted who we are to local enterprise in the area, to the LEPs in the area. I mean, obviously we have good connections with them anyway, but we've found other things that we can do as a result of it. We can look into resources that match these sectors now. They sit on a whole host of careers websites across the Humber, so we're now connected to other websites that we'd never be connected to. We're more prominent in business in the area, which is great because it's such a pioneering area in terms of certain organizations and businesses with green energy and net zero and that kind of thing. It's a great thing to be connected at, and it's something that's that I think we all feel very proud of in the Humber. So from that perspective, in terms of relationships and people that I've met even more people, and that they're listening to each other's podcasts. And it's creating quite a stir in that respect. That's been successful, and as I say, it's now attached to a multitude of different events and websites as a result of that, which we wouldn't normally be on. So that's been successful, I guess, in that respect.
And like anything that's new and a project that you want to get off the ground, what's not worked well? What have been the challenges? What have been the things that you've kind of on reflection gone, do you know what, I'm going to tweak that, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, time for sure. It's time consuming. You have to try and get the actual interview booked in with somebody that's very busy, so that's difficult, and making sure that they have all the right kit and that it's set right, or not kit, because we're doing this on a on a laptop
on a kitchen
Teams.
table.
Yeah, which is great. But I've had some people that have come in and had kids running around. I'm like, oh, can we just move you in another room? Like, what we do? So like actual logistics and time, it's really time consuming, and you can spend 8 hours editing something down and then it still needs work. So it's time consuming. So that's been difficult. Reaching students, for sure. It's completely changed really as a podcast, and that's not necessarily a negative thing. This is a common thing with podcasting, is that it starts as one thing and ends up as another. And I listened to The Diary of a CEO, which is Steve Bartlett's. Yeah, it's an incredible podcast. But that started off as a business podcast, and it's not a business podcast now. And that's an example, you start off as one thing and you end up as another. So we have struggled to reach students. We still have students listening, but not to the level that we'd like. So I know going forward, though, we will try and kind of realign ourselves, or add resources, think about where we sit, think about how we reach students. That's something that we'll try and push. But it started out at life as a student podcast and has ended up as a local enterprise podcast, and that's just what's happened. So it's kind of a negative, but I guess it's a positive also. So yeah.
What are your kind of hopes and dreams for the podcast going forward? Have your top 3 things that you want to change, or what you'd like more of?
Looking at schools, maybe speaking to schools, and how we can get this involved in their curriculum, maybe, or whatever it might be. Constant improval of editing. If you look at my editing of my first podcast, it's horrendous compared to my podcast in December. So learning from that, learning about editing all the way through, and you can only ever keep getting better with that. And every podcast I get better and better and better, and I'm learning along the way. So improved podcast editing in general, and then trying to reach other sectors, I guess. So I've not pushed this yet because we've paused as HOP while we do some big careers events happen at this start of the year. So it's kind of been a bit of a pause for us. There'll be a reach out for more people in the Humber region. And we're also going to be working alongside some other Uni Connects with regards to other podcasts and chopping bits of ours and feeding it into others, and kind of this,
amalgamation of a few different ones. Brilliant.
Yeah. Because other Uni Connects have got some great content in regards to parents or teachers or student. They have lots of student ambassadors, and it's like, okay, how can we have like an area where we can pull in each other's work and take sections and push it out as our own, because it makes sense to do that, really. I mean, ours is niche with it being the Humber, but there's certain things within it that are, I think, relevant across the UK, and there's definite things that I think some of the other Uni Connects would like. But yeah, going forward is finding a way of finding gaps together as Uni Connects and creating an area where they all sit, and how we can share work and take the load off other people. So that's sort of another thing that we're working on. Yeah.
So lots of even more collaboration in the future as well.
Yes, some of this one has gone to another podcast. There's Next Step Southwest podcast, and there's sections of this that they've put into theirs. So that has happened already as a result of this. So it's just like a bigger extension of that, I guess.
What do you need to do to be able to start a podcast? Have you got any tips? Have you got any piece of software or anything that you think, right, you need this?
You can go down a tech route where you spend thousands, but you don't need to do that initially. And I wouldn't do that. I would, work with nothing to begin with. So you can do it. You can do it for really cheap. If you've got willing guests to do it for free, and you use, in the context of what we're doing, Teams or Zoom or any of these kind of platforms, it's not the best audio, but it's fine for what we're doing at the minute to start off. So I think finding guests that are happy to do it for you, using a platform like this, or you could literally be in a room with somebody and record it on a phone. Again, it's not the best audio, but it's fine when you're starting out and you just want to like dip your toe in the water. Then that's fine. So you could be in a room with someone and put a phone down and record like that if you didn't want to do it this way. Software, so I just use Premiere Pro because I already know it. So when you edit with Premiere Pro, so obviously this is video as well, so I can edit this down, and when I export it, it will be MP3 file, and then my video file. So
Right,
you
okay.
can use platforms like this.
Mhm.
There's some free ones, WavePad, obviously GarageBand as well you could use, which is the Apple one. There's like something called Audacity. If, to be honest with you, if you Google free podcast, you will find so many versions of it. So you can do that for free, really, editing. Some of them, like in the Premiere Pro, has a lot more features on it, so you can do a lot more with it. But if you literally just cutting and pasting,
Yeah.
then some free ones are absolutely fine. So that, obviously you need a Spotify account and a YouTube account if you're doing a YouTube one as well. That's relatively simple. You can create your graphics for that via just Canva. In fact, Canva has a presetting on it in terms of graphic design for a podcast image. So you
Okay.
can, so that's quite easy to do, and you can pull in pictures of your guests each week and have, you know, that kind of thing. And then use Spotify, you'll write the content of what your podcast's about and try and include keywords to help people find it. It's really good. Spotify for podcasting, which is what we use, has a lot of analytics on it, so you can keep up to date with how your podcast is actually doing. Same with YouTube as well, sticking it on YouTube. I think if you can do 2 contents, then you should, because it's stupid not to. And actually our YouTube does better for some reason.
Okay.
It's probably because we've got a following on there, whereas we don't on Spotify yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then guests are the other thing, is just willing guests, so you can do it for free. Yeah, and then be okay with sitting and editing for days. Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes I'm quick and I'm like, oh, I've done that in 6 hours. That's quite good. And then
Yeah.
other times I'm like, no, and I have to step away and do something else because it's driving me insane. But yeah, I think they're the main things you need: a microphone or a phone or a Zoom or Teams, editing software, Spotify account, YouTube account, a Canva account for your graphics and guests.
Sometimes the hardest bit is overcoming yourself, you know, like just
Oh,
start something. You're probably
Yeah.
not going to love it even in 6 months' time, you know,
Yeah.
but you will grow, you will develop.
Absolutely, that's it. You know what you got to lose. If you can only try, can't you, with any of this stuff? And you know, it's difficult when you are a sole person in marketing in general. All you can do is keep trying and pushing. Particularly when, you know, in the context of Hop, we're a charity, really. We don't have a lot of money. We have we technically can't use money for, you know, advertising or anything like that. So a lot of the time it's like trying to use things that are free, that we you know, pulling in favors and working around it, and so you've got to keep trying to do things that you can keep your hand in that are free.
Have you got any last sort of top tips?
I think it was really good for us to have each podcast the same pattern. So we'd introduce the guest, very similar to what we've done now. You know, is there pathways, and then looking at GCSEs, university versus apprenticeships, and then so on and so forth. Because if you're getting repeat listeners, they know the pattern and they like that pattern and familiarity to the podcast that they're listening to. So that's the first thing. But also, or it makes it easier to evaluate what you've done if it's the same throughout.
Yeah.
So you can look back at my analytics and I can see people peter off here. Why?
Okay.
Well, we can, you know, so I think
That's
that
interesting.
try and keep your pattern the same, and then you can go in when you start to review it and you look at an evaluation, which we will be doing with this probably the next month, is right, this question or this area needs work and we can change it going forward for the next season. So I've definitely put that, which I think is good. Keep your podcast well under 40 minutes. 20 to 30 is preferable. People get bored. You know, even little 10-minute ones are great for students in particular, little 10-minute nuggets if you're doing something like that. And I put be open to your podcast changing along the way, which ours has. It was started out, you know, with this audience in mind and has ended up with this audience, and now what I will do is think, so how can I reach the original audience but not at the detriment of losing this audience that we've already got, and that kind of thing. You can read up on lots of editing tips in YouTube's videos on how to edit, which I've mentioned earlier, but I've said in terms of editing, get rid of waffling. If it's not relevant, honestly, you will be surprised how much, like, I'll edit this and it'll be half of what I've said, because I'm either repeating myself or I'm saying but then also not to the detriment of it sounding robotic, because it still needs to have some kind of humanness to it. So a few ums and buts, and where maybe the conversation has derailed, but in a fun way, keep that in, 'cause otherwise it can be a little bit like stagnant, I would say. And I put, the more you edit, the better you'll be. So just keep practicing with it. And the final thing I've said is have a good copy for the podcast that sums it up, but also do that for every single guest. Really give a clear, concise journey of what the podcast will sound like, with how that person's come across and some anecdotes from that person. And keep your SEO, search engine optimization, for anybody that is listening and doesn't know what that is. Keep that.
I was like, what does that mean?
They're like your keywords that help people find it. So if someone was on YouTube and they were typing in like, oh, I wonder if there's like any Humber podcasts that are people in engineering, like those keywords need to be throughout your copy, so that Google or whoever will put it higher up as a result of repetitive words and that kind of thing. But you can find lots of free things on how to bring up your SEO into your work and make sure it's prevalent throughout. So I think they're my main tips.
It's so interesting to hear what your journey has been to date, and who knows where you'll go next and what you'll do, and plans for the future. But it sounds like you've had a really interesting experiences throughout, but what comes across most is the fact that you've been receptive to all those opportunities. You've kind of just gone into them, you've worked hard, you've got out of them as much as you can that might help you in the future. And with the podcast, you've thought, right, here's a gap. This is what I want to grow myself personally with doing something like this, but also for HOP and everything in the Humber region and connecting all those different partnerships and different employers. So I think what comes across the most, I think, is just how you understand the sector, and you understand the work that goes into it, and you understand what that can mean for somebody else. And also how much effort that can take for you personally to get there and to do it, and that hard work and dedication. But it is worthwhile, and it is worth persevering and growing continuously, day by day.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's a lovely way to summarize that. Thank you. I guess my last thing would be like, be open to failing at this stuff, because you'll just learn from it and something will arise from it regardless. So don't worry if something's not a massive success. Our podcast is massively successful, but there's so much that's come from it, and we will continue to do it and learn. So just be open to trying things, which is basically what you've just said. So thank you so much.